journey.
Okay, thank you for that video, Annie, and for that icebreaker, Gino. So good morning to everyone, and especially to those who've just joined us. Those who don't know me, my name is Varsha, and I have the pleasure this morning of introducing our guest speaker, Lena Groenbach. So Lena is a researcher, a social entrepreneur, as well as a PhD student. She's passionate about empowering young people through education, exchange programs, as well as other opportunities. As all of you know, especially me, as I've been doing this myself for my PhD studies, simply doing a Google search on scholarship programs, scholarship opportunities is pretty daunting. This is where Lena and her organization comes in. So Lena founded Africademics in 2019. Today, Africademics has a followership of 30,000 plus, and this organization provides scholarship information and updates to this many people on a daily basis. So Lena, the screen, as they say, is yours. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for the lovely intro and for having me today. I'm very excited to be here, especially because I'm also a UCT student, not in criminology, but in sociology, so not too far off. And yeah, I mean, the reason I'm here today is because I was lucky enough to be supported through several scholarships throughout my undergrad studies and now for my PhD at UCT. And yeah, the reason I founded Africademics was really to give more young people like myself the opportunity to make use of the funding opportunities that are out there. Because what I realized is that we often think that there aren't really that many opportunities, but what I found out during my scholarship search is that there is an abundance of scholarships and other funding opportunities. And it's really about, you know, disseminating that information and making sure more people have access to it. So yeah, today I'll basically be doing a scholarship 101 with you guys. I'll share my screen quickly. Let's see. Okay, here we go. So there we go, perfect. So yeah, what I'll be covering today is basically to look at different types of scholarships and funding opportunities that are available. I'll also speak a little bit about where to find those scholarships, because as we just heard, just doing a basic Google search can be quite daunting, and it's not always where you will find those opportunities. And also how to find scholarships, as in when to start looking, how to start looking, which kind of sources you can use. And then we'll do a little sneak peek at the application process as well. But the focus today will really be on getting you started and helping you find opportunities, and then maybe we can elaborate on the application process a little bit later. And right at the end, I'll also just say a few words about Africademics and how Africademics can possibly support you in your scholarship search. But yeah, this is not a marketing thing, so it's really about giving you that information to get you started. So first and foremost, what kinds of scholarships are actually out there? Now, when we hear scholarships or when we speak of scholarships, then quite often I think we think about funding for a specific degree, right? Ideally, full funding covering all the costs for you to pursue a specific degree program. And yes, obviously, those are kind of the most important scholarships that we look for as students. They are available at undergrad level, at postgrad level, for PhDs. But in addition to those, there are also many other funding opportunities that I always encourage people to explore, because obviously the number of scholarships is limited. Not everybody will be able to get their dream full scholarship to do their master's or their PhD, but that doesn't mean that there are not other opportunities that you can benefit from. So a few things that I'll also look at are things like research fellowships, postdoc opportunities, but also non-degree scholarships. What I mean by that is simply scholarships or funding to pursue other activities, short courses, summer schools, and so on. And also competitions and awards. And that's also something that I feel is often overlooked. And those are really things that can also boost your career, boost your studies, boost your CV, and maybe even, you know, pave the way for getting one of those degree scholarships that we all want. Another category that we can look at, but we won't look into that today, are conferences and travel grants. The reason I won't really cover that is because obviously with COVID, there isn't really a lot happening in terms of at least in-person conferences and travel grants. But generally speaking, this is also something that I always encourage, especially postgraduate students, to look into. Just as an example, I was lucky to get a scholarship to attend a conference in New York a few years ago. Flight was covered, accommodation was covered, there was an early career scholar workshop, and it was an amazing opportunity to travel, to network with other young scholars. So really, guys, look into those opportunities as well, even if you're still at master's level. I got that while I was a master's student. So, not having completed your master's doesn't preclude you from attending conferences and presenting a paper there. Okay, but to get started, let's start with master's scholarships. Now, I know a lot of you are probably master's students, so you may ask, okay, why are we still looking for scholarships? Maybe we're already done. But getting full or partial funding for a master's degree is also something that you can do after you've already finished one degree. I often hear from people, I want to go study overseas, or I want to maybe specialize in something, or I want to do something else, but I don't want to do that as a full-on PhD, right? So doing a second master's, especially a shorter one, is something that you may want to look into, especially if you're thinking of studying abroad. So even if you're already done with your master's, this is something that some of you may want to consider. So those scholarships, they vary in terms of what they cover. Some of them only include your tuition fees, whereas others add your accommodation or a living allowance. Some of them cover your travel costs, especially when you study abroad. And then some of them even cover things like books or a laptop or a research allowance and so on. Depending on which country they're offered, they are usually granted for 1 to 2 years, depending on the duration of your master's. And in terms of eligibility, especially at master's level and then also at PhD level, there are quite a lot of funding opportunities available, much more so than at undergrad level. So one thing about funding is really the higher up in your education or in that academic ladder you move, the more funding is available. It's unfair because obviously a lot of people need funding to only get started. But fact is, the higher up you go, the more funding is generally available. And usually those scholarships are awarded based on merit or on financial need. Sometimes they're subject specific, but some programs are also open to applicants from any field of study. So you don't necessarily have to look for a criminology scholarship, but a lot of programs are actually open to applicants from any academic background, and they offer funding for pretty much any course that you want to do. Sometimes we also have scholarships for particular social groups, for example, for women or for students from specific countries or from a disadvantaged background or with a disability. So if you fall into one of those categories, then that's also something that you can keep in mind when you're looking for funding and in terms of just looking at the eligibility criteria. And I think some of you might also be considering studying abroad at some point. Maybe you're already looking into that. So once again, especially at master's and also at PhD level, there are quite a lot of opportunities available overseas. Personally, I always like to look at European countries rather than your US and your UK, simply because the cost of living and the cost of studying there is a lot lower. I know people always want to go to those prestigious Ivy Leagues or to your Oxford and to your Cambridge. And yes, those are amazing universities, but the cost is a lot higher. So it will be a lot more difficult for you to get all the funding to study at one of those universities. But looking at countries like Germany, like the Netherlands, like Belgium, where university studies are usually free or available at a very low fee, and also the cost of living is lower, is really something that's worth considering. However, especially when looking at master's degrees, keep in mind that in many European countries, the system of degrees is a little bit different. So obviously here in South Africa, we have our bachelor's, we have our 1-year honors, and then we usually have our 1-year master's. But now, for example, if you look at Germany, they usually do a 3 to 4 year bachelor's and then 2-year master's. Now, the implication is that you may be able to study there without having done your honors, because that simply doesn't exist in that system. But this is really just to make you aware of those differences. And if you're planning to study in a specific country, always good to do a little bit of research on the academic system as well. So in short, master's scholarships, really, those are for you if you want to study towards either first postgrad degree, or maybe even a second one, get some international experience and possibly even explore a new field of study or to specialize in something without having to embark on this massive piece of work that a PhD is. But obviously, if you've already completed your master's, or if you're kind of sort of getting there, then you may want to consider doing your PhD at some point. PhD scholarships, or I also added studentships because that's usually what they call them in the UK. Now, those usually offer full or partial funding for 3+ years. And then in some countries, those are also offered in connection with a part-time job at universities. Like in Germany, it's quite common that if you get a PhD scholarship, you'll be working as an assistant lecturer, or you'll be working as a research assistant. But once again, it really depends on the country, on the university, and in some cases, that's not a requirement. Now, once again, those PhD positions are, especially abroad, you do get fully funded ones. And some of them even offer additional funding for fieldwork, for conferences. So as I said, the higher up you go, the more funding is traditionally available. And in most cases, PhD funding is offered directly by universities or research institutions. Sometimes it's for a specific research project, but sometimes it's also just at a departmental level. And in some cases, there is funding available in individual department or in individual research projects or professors, by professors. So what that means for you is that we'll get to that later, but even if you don't see an official scholarship program advertised on the website, there is still a possibility that there might be funding through a particular professor or through a particular research project. So it's always worth inquiring about these things. And again, the nice thing is about PhD scholarships, in most cases, they are really open to applicants from any country. Yeah, sure, sometimes there are restrictions, but there are programs specifically for students from African countries, but at PhD level, it's usually quite open in terms of nationality. And also in terms of how those programs are structured, just again, be aware that PhD programs are structured differently in different countries. I know here in South Africa, you usually enroll and then you work with your supervisor, maybe you attend a few seminars, but in some countries, they're really highly structured. You still have to do coursework for your PhD program. So just for you to keep that in mind if you're planning to perhaps look for funding abroad. So PhD scholarships, really amazing opportunity to gain some international experience, and especially if you're considering going into research or into academia, but also into other career opportunities, consulting, industry, whatever the case may be. But I think, as we all know, who are doing PhDs, it does require a long-term commitment, which is also, if you're not really sure if that's your thing, you might want to consider doing a second master's and look for a scholarship there. Now, just a few examples of those postgraduate scholarships. So most of those that I'll be mentioning now are for PhD and in some cases also for master's scholarships. I won't go into them in more detail. I'll share the slides later, but just to give you a bit of an idea. So this is the German Academic Exchange Service. They have a massive database of scholarships, of university programs. Go to their website, check out the database. There's a lot of info there. Study in Holland, same thing for the Netherlands. Commonwealth scholarships are for obviously Commonwealth member countries, also at postgrad level. Campus France is also a similar initiative run by the French government. They do have a dedicated program for South Africa. So there's a number of scholarships specifically for South Africans to study in France. Rotary is offering research grants through its local chapters, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, German Foundation. They also work quite actively in South Africa. Swedish Institute, obviously in Sweden, they do quite a bit of PhD and research funding. Rhodes scholarships, I think they are currently still open for applications, at least for some countries. World Academy of Science, they are more at the PhD, postgrad, research level, but lots of interesting programs for researchers from developing countries. Pan-African University, it's a new network of universities in Africa. They also offer scholarships. Alexander von Humboldt Stiftung, also German. You can see I'm from Germany, so obviously I'm a bit biased here, but they have really amazing funding opportunities. And Ken Collins Trust, they offer scholarships for Southern African students from different countries. So really, those are just a few examples of programs that you may want to look into. And then moving up one level, if you have completed your PhD, or if you want to, if you want to pursue a specific research project, maybe you've just done your master's dissertation and you want to conduct additional research on that. Or maybe you've started your PhD and you need funding for your fieldwork. So there are different research fellowships available. Some of them for short-term research. Sometimes it's less than 6 months. Sometimes it's just a 1 to 3 month research stay. But also there are a number of fellowships that range from 6 to 24 months, which you can apply for either during your PhD studies or after. In terms of what they offer, once again, it's very, very diverse. So you get your traditional postdoctoral fellowships 1 or 2 years after completing your PhD, but you can also apply for short-term research funding. Or if you want to do practical lab work, for example, okay, maybe not so much in criminology, and that's more for natural sciences, I suppose, but visiting fellowships at research institution overseas. So once again, in that space, there are quite a lot of international options available as well, and often offered directly by universities or research institutions, but also in collaborations with companies or with foundations, specifically if it's a very specific research project that's being pursued. And yeah, similar to PhD, usually those programs are often open to applicants from anywhere in the world. But obviously, because it's at a higher academic level, you usually have to provide proof of your previous academic experience, publications, or draft a research proposal. But if you've done your PhD or if you're in the middle of that, then obviously that's something you will be able to do at that point. So those are really to pursue a specific research project or interest that you may have, and also really to build the foundations for a career in research or in academia. And also to just, explore how do things work outside of South Africa? How do things work at the research institution in France or in Italy? And to also really grow your professional network. And that's something that I really can't emphasize enough, regardless of which scholarship you apply for, the networking aspect of it, the people you get in touch with, the scholar community that you become a part of, that's often worth more than the actual funding that you get. So a few examples of research fellowships here. So Fulbright South Africa has an interesting program. Then also some universities like University of London, again, Campus France, German Academic Exchange Service, they also have those kinds of fellowships on their website. Then here's a few more. Center for Democracy and Development, they are situated in Ghana. So for those of you who might be interested in working a little bit more on the democracy political side, I know that's not strictly criminology, but the nice thing I think about criminology is you can kind of sort of branch out into different fields of study, be it more on the legal side or be it a little bit more on the social science side as well. Harvard University actually has a South African scholarship program. And then just a few more here. The Obama Foundation Scholars, really, really cool program. It is run by Barack Obama, and it's basically a leadership fellowship program for young leaders from all over the world. And, don't get intimidated by those big names or by those prestigious programs. I always tell people, somebody has to get in. So if you have a strong application, if you fulfill the requirements, then it may as well be you, so don't be hesitant to kind of shoot for the stars when it comes to applying, obviously, as long as you meet the requirements. Okay, so non-degree scholarships, those are the ones I mentioned earlier. And they are really, those outside of academia programs that might be something like a short course, a leadership academy, a summer school, or just another course that you can do that's may or may not be related to your field of study, but definitely amazing experience and also an opportunity for you to branch out a little bit. So again, depending on the program, funding ranges to just covering your tuition, but there are also those fully funded programs where you go to another country for 2 to 3 weeks and all your costs are covered. And again, also in that field, there are many opportunities specifically for applicants from developing countries or from the African continent, and several international opportunities. Obviously, at the moment, it's a bit tricky. So a lot of that has moved online, and I know that's not quite as exciting, but hopefully as we get out of this COVID situation, there will be more of those travel opportunities available again, because I always feel that, I mean, we're already doing so much online, so I'm not really that excited about applying for another online summer school. But then at the same time, you know, it's still a valuable experience. And as I said, hopefully in the future, there will be a few more in-person travel opportunities again, as those programs move back to in-person events. So yeah, this is really an opportunity for you to, even though you're not getting a degree, but you really learn a new skill, deepen your knowledge in a certain field of study, and also develop your personal and leadership skills and public speaking, communication, expanding your network. And those are all things that are obviously valuable for you as a person, but also to boost your CV and to strengthen your application for other scholarships. So I always see those as stepping stones for you to open more doors for you and to strengthen your application for the bigger scholarships. So once again, a few examples here. The Orange Knowledge Program, it's offered in the Netherlands, covers professional courses and also, I think, slightly longer certificate courses. The YALI program, it's offered by the United States government, and it's really an online leadership program, super for networking. AU Youth Volunteer Corps, that's a bit of a longer one if you have a gap year and if you want to volunteer for the AU. And a lot of the big international organizations like your World Bank, your United Nations, all the different UN agencies, lots of them have internship programs, fellowship programs, short courses. So have a look at those as well, because having that on your CV is a huge bonus when it comes to applying for other things. And yeah, just a few more examples of those non-degree programs that you can look into. So really make use of those, especially during your semester holidays, or if you're transitioning from one degree to another, or just if you have that little bit of extra time to really boost your skills and your CV. And quite similar with competitions and awards. So what the nice thing about these things is, and I've actually applied for quite a few of those through Africademics, if you have a cool project or an idea or an achievement, or if you're running an organization, or if it's really just an idea that you want to pursue, maybe relates to academia and to your studies or not, then those are things that you can really use to either get funding for your idea or to get mentorship and support to implement it. So these programs often include coaching, training, and access to professional networks, and they are super valuable. I was lucky to participate in 2 with Africademics, and it's really helped me to get the organization to the next level and to also teach me some new skills that I can use, not just for Africademics, but also for my own professional life. So examples, here we go. So obviously, when we speak about competitions and awards, there's usually prize money involved, but also, once again, probably after COVID, you may get travel funding to attend a certain award ceremony. I was supposed to actually travel to Germany earlier this year for an award ceremony. It was done online, so that was a little bit disappointing. But for you, if you're looking at next year or the year after, then hopefully those might be options again. And like I said, it's really also about the coaching and mentorship that you get, networking or publicity for your project or for your idea. And yeah, eligibility really depends on the program. Some programs are for youth, so there's a cutoff age of maybe 25 or 30 or 35. But once again, it really depends. And for the application, since those competitions and awards are usually, project-based, they might want you to submit a project plan if it's an initiative you're planning, or if it's a writing competition or a photography competition, then obviously you would need to submit a portfolio or whatever work you're competing with. So what I really like about these competitions is that you can get recognition and support for work that you've already done. So maybe you've been active in a certain society, or maybe you've been volunteering somewhere, and this is something you've been doing for a long time. So if there is an award that really targets that area that you're working in, you can get recognition, you can get funding for it, you can really boost that project. Or you can also just pursue an interest or a skill that you have. Like maybe you like writing essays, or you enjoy photography, or you're an artist, whatever it may be that you do outside of your studies. Look at that as well. So once again, a few examples here. So for example, the Ansisha Prize, it's for young entrepreneurs from African countries. SDG Pioneers is for people working towards one of the sustainable development goals. Hashcode is a Google coding competition. Don't know if anybody's interested in that, but if you are, here you go. TED Fellows, very cool program. I'm sure you guys all know the TED Talks. So TED Talks has a program where you can apply to be a fellow. They coach you and they help you develop your own TED Talk, which is super cool. Data for COVID, Schneider Go Green, it's a global student competition. And just a few more, those are if you're interested in writing, Human Rights Essay Award, Kane Prize for African Writers, and the African Studies Center in Leiden. And this one I think is currently open for submissions. They offer a prize for the best thesis, which was either done at Leiden and African Studies Center or at any university in Africa. It's a small cash prize, but they also publish your thesis. So really, really cool to get exposure if you've recently completed the thesis. So look at those competitions, look at those awards. They really complement your regular scholarship application, and the networking and just the skills you get out of them are really, really amazing. Okay, so that was the quick overview of those different types of scholarships that there are. Now, let's quickly talk about where to find those scholarships, because obviously that's the big question. That's often the big problem, that we just don't know where to start. Now, first point of where to start looking are really universities and research institutions. I think UCT is a very good example because they really have a very comprehensive scholarship and funding website. The postgraduate funding office is very active. So I think UCT students are very lucky to have that. It's not the case at all universities, especially in other African countries, which is partly why I founded Africademics, because in most countries, students can't get that kind of information from the university. But at UCT, you can, so make use of that. But also, if you're interested in studying at a specific university, or if you want to work with a research institution, check their website. I mean, it's very easy, it's very simple, but that's really the first starting point. And also all those scholarship foundations that I mentioned earlier, all those different programs. Obviously, they have websites, they have information available there. In some cases, government offers scholarship, can be at national level, but also local governments or even municipalities sometimes offer funding. And then obviously there's companies, there's NGOs, there's other organizations. And then we have scholarship platforms, which is what Africademics is, and which is also what several other organizations are doing. I'll introduce a few of those in just a second. And in social media, messenger groups, very underused when it comes to looking for scholarships, but loads of information out there. And obviously also your personal networks. Your old students, you know lots of other students, you know lecturers, you know professors, you've probably met other students along the way. So use those personal networks as well. Tell them, guys, I'm looking for funding in that field. Do you know anyone? Do you know anything? Let me know. But this is just one note of caution, especially when it comes to social media and messenger groups. I was not aware of this when I started with Africademics, but there are quite a lot of agencies or so-called agencies who offer things like, we'll get you a full scholarship and a work permit and this and that to go to America. And in the end, they ask you for an application fee, and they take your application fee and they disappear. So be very cautious of that. If you see information shared on social media that's, you see there's like spelling errors or grammatical errors in there, and it just sounds too good to be true, it usually is. And especially if it takes you to some dodgy website or to a weird form where you're asked to fill in your details without really giving you information about the scholarship, just be very careful of those because there are actually scams out there. But so starting with universities and research institutions, how can you find information there? Like I said, many of the bigger universities have their own funding department, especially for postgrads or for international students like UCT does. So most overseas universities in Europe, in the States, will have that. And you can simply find a lot of information on their website. Sometimes you have to dig through the different pages a little bit, but it's usually there. And obviously, when it comes to you, for example, wanting to do a PhD, or maybe just inquiring about a research fellowship, you can also reach out to individual departments or to research projects or to potential supervisors and ask them. Because like I said, funding isn't always advertised on the website, but sometimes there is funding available that a department or research group are sitting on, and that can be allocated to a deserving student if and when they inquire. So it's always worth also reaching out personally, especially at PhD and post-PhD level. So the good thing about finding information from universities and research institutions directly is really that you get opportunities that are offered at that particular university. So if you want to study at UCT, then UCT will give you what's available there. Information is usually reliable, and in some cases, the application is actually integrated with your application for that specific course. So that's very nice, because then you don't have to prepare 2 applications. But especially at master's level, for example, you just apply for your regular master's course, and then you tick a box somewhere on the application form, or you submit a tiny additional document to apply for funding as well. However, like I said, especially on the African continent and in other developing countries, if that's where you want to study, not all universities and research institutions supply that kind of information on their website. And it's not always up to date, it's not always comprehensive. So there are limitations to that. But examples, there we go, UCT postgraduate funding website, or this is Leiden University. They have a whole database on their website. And I think this is Edinburgh University. Also, you can see, you can look at the different colleges, you can filter awards by region. So it's quite a sophisticated website that they have where you can find funding. Then your next category would be your foundations, your governments, other organizations. They usually obviously only share information about their own scholarships and funding schemes. So they won't tell you about this other opportunity that is out there, like a university would. But information is usually available on the website. Many of them have newsletters, many of them share information on social media, or they post regular adverts and calls when a particular scholarship is open for applications. And also what's nice, that they often have a contact person in charge of the program. So if you have questions, if you need support, then quite often there is someone that you can reach out to and that can assist you with applying for that particular opportunity. And yeah, just like with universities, information there is usually quite reliable, it's up to date, and it's usually quite comprehensive. I'll show you a few examples just now, but obviously one particular foundation will only share information about their own programs, and they don't always publish things as timelessly as they should. So sometimes the calls will only reach you a little bit late. So you kind of have to be on the ball when it comes to those scholarships. So here we see, for example, British Council, the Commonwealth Scholarship, lots of information on their website. MasterCard Foundation, they also have a chapter at UCT, so check that out. Or the Rhodes Scholarship, they have a very, very comprehensive website with tutorials and with testimonials and lots of tips and tricks on how to apply. So those are very comprehensive. Or here, example from Germany, once again, the Germany Scholarship, also lots of info available for you. And this is actually a website by the Department of Higher Education and Training that I discovered recently. So they also have quite a lot of scholarships for South Africans specifically on their website. And then there are those scholarship platforms, which Africademics is one of. And those are really dedicated portals that collect scholarships from different sources and share them for different target groups. So like Africademics, those are usually websites with a searchable database. We use social media, and quite often those platforms also offer additional information or advice, or they run webinars. So the nice thing is really there's a really broad range of opportunities, usually with a searchable database, so you can filter by country, by level of study. They're constantly updated, but they are quite often overloaded with ads. That's something that I found very annoying, especially if you're accessing from your phone and it is pop-ups all the time. So that's the case when you have an organization financing their page with ads. Africademics doesn't do that because I find it super annoying. But quite often there's lots of ads within those scholarship details. So you have to be careful that now you don't click on an ad while you're looking for scholarship information. But yeah, not all of them offer support for applicants. Also, sometimes they only get the calls and share the calls quite late, but really, really cool repositories, basically, of scholarship information. And obviously, Africademics is out there. ESSA, they just launched a searchable database specifically for applicants from African countries, super comprehensive. Opportunities for Africans, that's one with a little bit of this ad problem, but still they have an amazing amount of scholarships online. German Academic Exchange Service database, After School Africa, also lots of opportunities. Bursary South Africa, those are specifically for South Africans, focusing a little bit more on those undergrad bursaries that are offered by companies, but also quite a few opportunities in the postgrad field. Study in Holland, Indian scholarship positions also very good, but more on the American, US, Australia kind of geographic region. But if you're looking for funding for those countries, that's a very good page to start. Okay, so then social media and messenger. So that's really what I started using for Africademics, just because I realized that you can reach so many more people than through those traditional, websites or newsletters. And more organizations are using those. So obviously, universities, institutions, funders, platforms, and so on, all use social media to share opportunities. But you also find individuals who are passionate about sharing scholarships and who share them on Twitter, on Facebook, in Facebook groups, for example. So, like I said, there are also those informal groups or channels that they're not always easy to find, but then once you start looking around on social media, you will find them. And yeah, most common platforms, it's your Facebook, your Twitter, your LinkedIn, but also WhatsApp and Telegram. So for example, through Africademics, we have a WhatsApp, several WhatsApp groups. I think it's 10 by now, because you can only have 250 people on each group. But on Telegram, you can have channels with, hundreds of members. So we also use that to share scholarships, and other organizations do that as well. And the cool thing is it's really easily accessible. You can share information also on social media and really get updates from your own network. So once you connect with the right accounts and with the right people, you will get those updates, and usually quite up to date as well. But information on social media, it's not always complete. You don't always get the full info. So then you still have to go and visit the website. And the sources, they're not always reliable. So guys, really be careful, especially on those WhatsApp groups, what is shared. If the link looks dodgy, if it just takes you to an online form without giving you info, then just be careful. And obviously, you're also restricted to your existing network, right? Because if you don't connect with a specific account, then you won't see their updates. So this is really where you need to get active, link up with the right accounts, follow the right people on Twitter and on Facebook and where not, to get that information. And how to find them? Obviously, manually visiting websites of universities and other places is the good starting point. So if you're interested in a particular university, check there first. But also, guys, subscribe to newsletters. It's such a simple thing. I do it for Africademics to always get the latest scholarships. And, all those foundations and some universities as well, they have newsletters. So all you have to do is go there once, sign up for it, and then you don't have to constantly go and check websites and check social media. So yes, getting lots of newsletters can be annoying sometimes, but it also makes sure that you get the right information at the right time. And same with those scholarship platforms. We don't have that yet in Africademics, but a few of the others have that function where you just fill in a form, you tell them what kinds of scholarships you're interested in, and then each month or each week, you automatically get sent a list of scholarships that are suitable for you. Super cool feature. So have a look at that. And follow accounts on social media, join groups, use hashtags and keywords when you search. So use scholarship, South Africa, postgraduate, criminology, and don't just, randomly venture out there. And also, as I said, activate your personal networks. That's really one of the keys to finding more information. When to look for scholarships, we've already heard a few words about that in the intro video. So the biggest mistake that I see when people contact me is that they look for funding after they've been admitted to university. So people will apply to prestigious universities in the US, in the UK, and then 3 to 4 months before the start of the program, they get the admission letter, and then they realize, oh, damn, I don't have funding. And then they try in the last 3 months to find funding. And it's not possible, because most of the scholarship programs close for applications between 6 and 12 months, prior to the start date of the program. So looking, for funding after you've been admitted, in most cases, it's just not going to work. So the scholarship search should really happen while you're applying for university admission, or even before, depending if you want to study abroad. So guys, really at least 6 months prior to the start date of your degree, if it's in South Africa, and really ideally 12 months or more if you want to study abroad. There's so much admin involved. There are so many steps, so many documents. So really take that time to do your research and prepare. And yeah, I know this sounds harsh, but don't apply for a university if you're not at least sure that there is funding that you could possibly tap into. Because applying for those universities, it's time consuming. It's sometimes you have to pay application fees as well. So if you know that you can't afford it without a scholarship, and if there is no scholarship that you can apply for, then don't waste your time and your money on those applications, but rather focus on the ones where there's at least a possibility of you getting funding. And yeah, I think for me, that has really been the one big thing that I've learned, to make that search for scholarships and opportunities an ongoing project, guys. It's an investment in your career, in your life, and that is really something that it never stops. So don't wait until the, 3rd year of your PhD to start then looking for scholarships and funding, but really make it an ongoing thing. Like, subscribe to those newsletters, or once a month, sit down for 2 hours and look into funding opportunities, because you never know what's out there. There might be something for you in your 2nd year of study, or at that particular age that you're at, and you might just not be aware of it. So there's always opportunities out there, and ideally you should always have an application in progress, or you should be, waiting for a new program to open application. So really make it an ongoing thing. Don't wait until you really need it. And yeah, last part, I'll just say a few words about the application process. As I said, not in too much detail, because it's quite a big topic, but just to give you a little bit of a sneak peek. So obviously, these days, most programs have an online application process, which makes it a lot easier. When I applied for my master's scholarship, which was from a German foundation, I still had to courier physical original documents to Germany. And it was only like 4 years ago, and it cost me a lot of money to do that. So luckily, these days, it's mostly online. And then you submit your documents via email or through an online application portal. Like I said, in some cases, scholarship applications are tied to your university admission, which is very nice if and when that happens. Some programs are a bit more challenging because they have an interview process or a test, but that's really mostly kind of like at post-PhD level, when you're going into the more serious research space, or also for some of those leadership and fellowship programs, because they really want to meet you as a person rather than just looking at your application on paper. Yeah, in some cases, and that's always a question that pops up, do I have to have proof of admission at a certain university in order to apply for a scholarship? Now, again, that really depends. For some scholarship programs, you have to have a letter of admission to a certain course from a certain university in order to apply. And that can be tricky if that university's deadline is only after the scholarship deadline. It happens sometimes. But other programs don't require you to be admitted to a specific university when you apply for that scholarship, and you can then submit proof of admission a bit later. So that really depends. So you just make sure that you look at application instructions. And also one of the really useful things that I've learned, guys, if you take your scholarship search seriously, always do your own research and make an Excel doc. Like, there is no way anybody can remember all the details of all the scholarships that we've looked at. So make yourself an Excel doc, name of the scholarship, university, application deadline, documents required to apply, and then just where you are in the process. Whichever way works for you, but just having that list, having that Excel doc, it really helps you keep track of application deadlines, things that you still need to do, things that you still need to find out. It just makes your life easier. So be structured and work with that Excel doc. In terms of the application documents, so again, it depends on the scholarship, what they require, but typically they will ask for copies of your degrees and qualifications. Sometimes they must be certified, sometimes not, sometimes they must be translated. But if your degree is in English, then that's usually quite straightforward. In some cases, copies of other supporting documents like awards that you've won or extra courses you've taken, certifications, volunteering work. That's very common in Germany, for example. They love it if you've done volunteering or social work. So also, guys, always make sure that if you participate in a project or if you engage in volunteer work, get a certificate for that, ask for it, because that's really when those things come in very handy. And then, there's your CV. And here I also just want to say, guys, check the requirements for the particular scholarship that you're applying for. Quite often it says CV must be 2 pages or it must be 3 pages. The scholarship I applied for, you actually had to write an essay CV, so a 3 to 4 page written CV. It's not very often that they ask for that, but it's possible. And then, and this is usually the trickiest one, your letter of motivation or your statement of purpose, where you explain why you deserve the scholarship, why you're the perfect candidate, how your previous experience has prepared you for this, and how it fits in with your overall career plans. And then usually reference letters, make sure they come from academic references or professional references. I sometimes see people getting reference letters from their parents or from their friend. So guys, professional academic reference letters. Research proposal, if it's a PhD scholarship or a research program. And as I said, in some cases, your letter of admission from university. Okay, last slide. Then, it's almost been an hour. I don't want to take up too much time, but just a few general guidelines for when you get to that point of drafting your application. First, and again, it's such a simple thing, but it's often where things go wrong. Read the detailed application and formatting requirements for your application and make sure you adhere to them. If they say your document must be in a certain format or this particular thing must be submitted by this particular deadline, then make sure you do it, guys. This is really where, it's the first step of throwing out applications that might otherwise be good, but that were just submitted in the wrong format or at the wrong time. And those instructions are always available on the scholarship website. So rather read them twice and make extra sure that you've understood everything. But just those formal guidelines of how to submit things, in which format to submit it, who to submit it to, and so on, really, really key. And guys, if you're submitting things via email, don't just send an empty email with attachments. Like, I sometimes get that, not that Africademics is offering scholarships, but we often get inquiries and people just randomly send documents and there's not even a hello in the email and it doesn't explain a lot. So always make sure that you try and find the person that your application is being addressed to, and you address it to dear Mr. or dear Professor, whatever, explain what it is, thank them for their consideration, and sign and include a signature. Then, and this is another this is a little pet peeve of mine, guys, don't submit your CV or your reference letter or whatever in Word format. And when you scan something, don't scan it as a JPEG or as like a picture format. Send everything in PDF, guys, at all times. If you don't do that, remember a Word document, it's an editable document. So if you send someone a Word document, they open it in their version of Word, maybe it doesn't recognize your formatting, maybe it doesn't recognize your font, or maybe they accidentally start typing in your document, then, you know, it's messed up. And then they don't know, is this the correct version? Was it meant to look like this? So guys, always convert your stuff to PDF. It's super, super important. And yeah, once you start applying for things, I mean, you will probably end up applying for several scholarships. Not just because you might need several scholarships to fund a particular course of study, but also those things are competitive, right? So we have to live with rejection, and you will get rejected by I don't know how many programs until you finally get in. It's normal, it's part of the game. The good thing is that you will start building kind of a set of application documents, right? Letters of motivation, where you have a basic thing and then you just kind of tweak it a little bit for this particular scholarship. But when you do that, guys, make sure you triple check the details, the date of the document, the file name of the document, the dear Professor XYZ salutation, the content. There's nothing more embarrassing than sending the application for the Rhodes Scholarship to the Commonwealth Foundation. It will probably get your application thrown out immediately because it's just, you know, it shows that you don't pay attention to details. So yes, recycle previous applications, but really triple check those tiny little details, including the file name, including the date of the document, and update them. And yeah, this is also really key. Get feedback on your application. Ask people in your circle to review them, to give their feedback. But at the same time, make sure you ask people who are qualified for it. I think we all have the tendency to ask people who are close to us, maybe ask your parents or maybe ask your friends. But just remember, they might not have more experience in writing scholarship applications than you have, right? Even if, you know, I mean, I trust my mom with a lot of things, and luckily she's a journalist, so she knows a lot about writing, but she doesn't know how a scholarship motivation letter must look like, or she doesn't know what a CV looks like these days because she hasn't applied for a job in 20 years, right? So she may be able to give me feedback, but that may not necessarily be useful feedback for me. So when you ask for feedback, try and ask someone who works in that space, be it someone working at university, one of your lecturers, someone working in HR, reviewing applications. So make sure the people you ask for feedback are actually qualified to do so. And remember, guys, feedback, it's always personal, it's always subjective. You can ask 5 people for feedback on your application and you will get 5 different types of feedback. So also use your own judgment when it comes to adopting that feedback. Just because somebody says, oh, I would, you know, change your CV in this and that way, it might not be appropriate for what you're using it for, or for the particular program that you're applying for. So always, you know, don't just blindly adopt feedback, but make your own choices and be selective when it comes to that. And then obviously, as I said, many organizations offering scholarships, there are contact details on the website where you can ask for clarification and for support. So make use of that, but make sure that before you contact someone, you've read the instructions, you've checked out the website, you've read the frequently asked questions, because yeah, people also get annoyed when you ask them, when you ask them questions and that particular question is already answered on the website. But do reach out and do ask, because there's always questions that, you know, that haven't been answered on available pages. And yeah, last but not least, really guys, check scholarship websites and social media. Lots of organizations are actually putting out things like tutorials or info webinars, how to apply. They get former scholars to talk about their experience. So there's really more and more material out there that also supports you and helps you with your application. Yeah, those are just a few resources and tools. I won't go into too much detail, but I will share the link to this presentation in the chat just now, and then you can just check out the links. And yeah, what Africademics does, or what we can do for you, as I said, we share daily scholarships on all the usual social media channels. We have a weekly scholarship news flash that you can sign up for. We've developed a number of scholarship documents where we introduce specific programs. There is a website, there's a blog with stories of our scholarship ambassadors. WhatsApp channel, Telegram channel. And then we also have a scholarship ambassador program. And I think the last thing that I don't want to mention today is basically the ambassador program is a program that trains young scholars, volunteers to become scholarship advisors for Africademics. So we are currently training a group of, it's just around 20 people all over Africa, students, young scholars from different backgrounds, to join Africademics as scholarship advisors, to really help others find and apply for scholarships. They are currently in their last month of training. And what we will be doing next month is we'll basically run a competition where people can apply to get a one-on-one consultation with our ambassadors. So it's for them to really implement everything they've learned, but it's also for you to have give you personal advice on scholarship search. So keep an eye on our social media, because we will be launching that very shortly. And obviously you are more than welcome to apply for one of those consultations. And that is it. Thank you very much. I think I need a sip of water now, and I will stop sharing my screen. I hope this was useful. I hope you're not death by information, but yeah, feel free to pop questions in the chat, and handing back to whoever will be moderating next.
Thank you, Elena, for the super insightful presentation. I think what I found the most useful. Okay, hopefully you can hear me now. I've been speaking to myself and then muted myself again, and here I am back again. So thank you very much, Lena, for a very insightful presentation. I must say, I think what I found the most useful is that we shouldn't be afraid to reach out to funders and to your network, because you never know who knows what. And in that line, I'd actually very much like to share my screen again to ask you if you would be willing, or if you are interested, to hear more about applying for scholarships. So if you could just grab your phone and go to mentimeter.com, enter the code, and
menti.com,
enter the code and indicate your preference. Would you be interested to just hear more about the actual application process? Because finding scholarships, difficult as it may be, applying is perhaps a bit more difficult. Okay, and while you do that, let's open the floor for a few questions. You can either simply unmute yourself and ask your question directly to Lena, or if you want, you can also just post in the chat box.
And we'll forward your questions through. We'll ask on your behalf.
So I actually want to make a comment, if I can just start the conversation, which is that something Lena said, which I want to just second, which is to do a second master's. I think I did a second master's and it was the best thing I did. If you're not 100% sure about whether you want to do a PhD or not, if you want to maybe explore something a little bit different, and especially if you want to go overseas, a second master's is a great way to do that. And if you've already done a master's, it's kind of easier because you've done research work on your own already, and you're prepared. And as she said, there's more funding for a master's than there is for undergrad studies. So if you're all interested, I strongly recommend looking into doing a second master's overseas. Yeah, definitely, before you think about PhDs.
Okay, so we have a question from Varsha. Varsha, please go ahead.
So Anine, I'll have to think about that second master's idea. I'm not sure about that. I'm really surviving the first master's. But I have actually applied for a doctorate for next year, but my intention is not really to do it next year, but for 2023. The reason I've applied is mainly because I think that I need that acceptance to organize funding, which you alluded to in your presentation. So a couple of questions. The first one is, because you did mention that, I think you did mention a time frame, I may have missed it. If I'm wanting to do the PhD in South Africa, is 1 year enough time to go about organizing funding? I was able to get a scholarship for this master's degree, but it just covers my fees. It's not living expenses. And for a PhD, I'm going to need more than just the fees. That's my first question. My second question is, I actually did get feedback on my letters of motivation and some of my documents, but not really from appropriate people, but from people that, you know, probably too busy, that just skimmed it and weren't really that interested. But my, I don't know. So you're saying, you know, get feedback, ask your lecturers, your professors, ask people in the know. My feeling is that, you know, they're just really busy and I don't want to be bothering them. And I'm like, I was so hesitant to ask. I mean, there was something else I applied for, not a scholarship, something else, and I needed reference letters. And I mean, it was like the world's most intimidating experience to have to send an email to say, look, I need this reference letter. And then, of course, both of them were late. And then I had to, like, it was terrifying to have to say, look, I kind of need this now. It was, so, I mean, I hear what you're saying, ask people, but how do you get, I mean, I understand you saying that they're generally willing to help, but how do you get around that, the busyness factor and the fact that people often just don't get back to you? Is that something that I just go through, or is it with everyone? I'm sure I have other questions, but I think so that I do have one more. The other thing I found, so with the UCT postgraduate funding, I'm already excluded from that because they only fund you if you're a full-time student. So, you know, those kinds of arbitrary, okay, in my view, arbitrary, I shouldn't say that because it's streaming live. So scratch that from the record, but those kinds of requirements, you know, like they just exclude you immediately. So, you know, is that a common requirement for other scholarship opportunities? And I think that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, cool. Let me start with the first one. So yeah, look, I think in terms of the time frame, if you're looking at studying in South Africa, then I think 1 year is appropriate. Obviously, yeah, it always depends how lucky you are in terms of finding funding, which field of study you're in, where do you want to study, and so on. But obviously, if you want to study in South Africa, then there's a lot of things that you won't have to worry about, like applying for your visa or getting, you know, acceptance at a university with different application deadlines and so on. So I think in terms of your timeline, that's a good framework that you're working with. Yeah, getting feedback from qualified people, it's definitely not something that only you are struggling with. I think all of us that are working with supervisors on theses or whatever, we know that sometimes it's already difficult to get feedback on your research and on the things that are part of your degree, because yes, they are super busy. That is unfortunately true. When it comes to reference letters, one thing that makes it easier is actually if you pre-draft the letter and literally just send them the template and ask them to put their signature on it. They're usually very happy to do that, or they ask you to do that in any case. But yeah, that's the easy part. Getting feedback on something you have written is more tricky. One thing I found is that more junior staff, postdocs, colleagues, people you might be working with directly, they may not be as experienced, but they might be able to relate a little bit more to what you're going through, and they might be a little bit more willing to help. So obviously, while the older, more experienced professors are the ideal go-to candidates, but yeah, to just maybe look a little bit further down on the hierarchy ladder for people who are more keen to support you. And then, yeah, I mean, there are some organizations that offer assistance with these things. I mean, like I said, with Africademics, we will slowly start doing that. Obviously, we won't be able to review everybody's documents, but we are busy building a network of volunteers who, you know, do those things for selected applicants. And there's another organization, it's called Dear Young Graduate. It's run by a lady from Ghana, Lois is her name. And she's also busy kind of reaching out to academics that are willing to help review scholarship applications. So maybe have a look at that as well. Yeah, and then regarding full-time studies and getting funding. Yes, that is unfortunately quite a common requirement. Because obviously scholarship or funders say that, well, if we pay you to do this, then we want you to be doing only this and not other things at the same time and making money at the same time. So that was something that I also encountered. I was working part-time when I applied for my PhD, and I had to quit my part-time job in order to be eligible for my PhD funding. So in addition to saying you must be a full-time student, that foundation also said that if you earn above a certain threshold, then we will deduct that from your scholarship, which is then obviously also, not ideal. So it is unfortunately very common. And I think there are a few programs where they don't mind if you have a part-time job, but you must still be registered for full-time study. So that is kind of the only way to get around that. You must be registered for full-time study, and then you must kind of just hope that your supervisor doesn't mind if you take a year or two longer. Quite often they are flexible. So I think the trick here is to, yes, you must register for full-time study, but then if you still have to or want to work on the side, then you just have to be able to juggle those things very well. Yeah.
Well, I would also just like to add to that if you are a UCT student, you have full access to Uct Career Services, and they are absolutely amazing. They're so willing to help, and they're always very happy to make time for you. Just go to their website, uctcareerservice.uct.ac.za. They have special programs where they help you with applications for bursaries and scholarships, and even writing letters if you want to apply for jobs and stuff like that. They have a full set of just stuff that they help with, and it's well worth your time to just scroll through their website and see what they can help you with.
Can I also just add one thing about it is really hard to ask for letters of recommendation because, as you say, they're really busy and it feels like such an imposition. But I think every single academic has needed to ask other academics for letters of reference. That's how they got their scholarships and their positions. It's the way the whole industry works. We rely on each other for letters of recommendation. So don't feel too guilty about it. If you help by drafting it yourself, that'll speed things up, but it's just part of how things work. You're not like asking anything unreasonable of them. It's part of the job.
Okay, thank you everyone.
Okay, I see that Simba posted a question. Says that most scholarships require that you show an active participation in your community. What exactly does this mean, and how do I make myself attractive to these organizations to fund me? Thank you for your question.
Yeah, so that is very true. So most scholarship organizations these days, they don't look for just academic excellence. They don't just look for that smart, nerdy person that manages to get good marks in exams, but they want to see a well-rounded individual that is also willing to, to make an impact outside of academia. So yes, that is part of more and more scholarship applications. What it means is that really they want to see that you are socially engaged beyond your studies. And that can be in various forms. So the nice thing about this is that there isn't usually a template of what you have to provide. There is a super broad range of activities that, may support your application in that sense. It can be something like being active in a student society. If you're at UCT, there is loads and loads of student societies and communities where you can be a member, where you can be active, where you can have a certain role. And then obviously for that, you get them to write you either a letter of reference or a certificate that you, student XYZ, were part of the society from then to then, those were your duties, and this is what you did. That's one way you can do it, obviously with university-related things. But obviously, there's also lots of other ways to volunteer. I mean, you've already said it in your community. It can be a local NGO. It can be the SPCA. It can be you tutoring kids at your local primary school. It can be you helping out in a soup kitchen. Millions of things. In the end, it doesn't matter so much what it is. It matters that you're doing something and that you really show that you don't just sit at home and study all day, but that you really look beyond your academic career. So, and I mean, yeah, it relates to something that I said earlier, like all those things that you do in your own time, or that maybe you did when you were back in high school or in your early student days. Make sure that you get proof for those things. Ask the organization, can you please just write me a letter of confirmation or a letter of reference for what I did? Because obviously you will need to have that on paper. And that's how you do it. So then as part of your application, you can submit written proof of the activities that you've been involved in. But also when it comes to writing your letter of motivation or your statement of purpose, where you can really add to the things that are on your CV and really explain things in your life and in your career that have impacted you, that you're passionate about. And that's also where your volunteer activities or your community involvement should make an appearance, especially if that's specifically stated in the scholarship requirements. Yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Lena. Yeah. No, anytime.
We also have a question from Katlin, who asks, with regards to the community participation, would it have to be within the past year or so, or does this just very dependent on the scholarship?
Yeah, so look, it really depends. I mean, in most cases, it doesn't say that you have to be, have been active within the past year or two. And obviously, everybody is also very conscious that especially the past year or two we're not particularly easy when it comes to going out and volunteering, or when it comes to even leaving our house at some point. So obviously, people evaluating scholarship applications are also people, and they are very much aware that things have been quite difficult in the past year or two. And they are also conscious that a lot of students had to basically devote all their energy to just making it through their course with distance learning and everything else that we've been struggling with. So in short, no, that isn't normally a requirement unless it's explicitly stated in the guidelines, but I've never really seen that. It's obviously, you shouldn't only have this, 2-week volunteer thing that you did back in grade 10. That probably won't really make the cut. So what they really want to see is more of an ongoing engagement or an ongoing, service spirit, or I can't think of a good English word, but I think you know what I mean. So it's more important that that you've constantly been involved in one thing or another. It doesn't have to be the same thing. It doesn't have to have been last year, but obviously the more you have, the better, right? So yeah.
Thank you, Lena. Yeah, it was just something I was so curious about because of the whole pandemic situation, obviously not being able to kind of volunteer at places and really be a part of community outreach programs, etc. But I think the generic principle, the principle that can be applied across any community-based initiative is to show that you are part of something greater than yourself, whether it be within your community, whether it be through online platforms, etc. I think if you always have a persevering personality and the drive to do better, not only for yourself, but for others as well, I think any institution, any scholarship based organization will definitely take that into consideration. But with regards to the pandemic, because that was something I was very curious about, Lena, have you experienced a drop in scholarship availability for international scholarships, that is, and also how has that kind of evolved over the past years and 2 years now with regards to applying for international universities, or like you said, online summer schools, etc. How is that experience change? Are students still looking to apply overseas? Are there still funding opportunities available, or they become more constricted? Is there a much kind of emphasis, or is it become more competitive now that less scholarships are available? Thank you.
Oh yeah, that's a very good question. Yeah, I think there's a few things that we've seen, yeah, during and after, well, it's not really after this pandemic, but like over the past year or two. Yeah, look, I mean, obviously, I think in the first year of COVID, there has probably been a drop in terms of availability, not so much because of funding availability, but also because of mobility limitations. Because a lot of countries had and still have travel restrictions. I mean, if we look at Australia and New Zealand, they're not even really letting people in. So obviously, even if you theoretically could get a scholarship to study there, then you wouldn't be able to take up that scholarship. So some countries have reacted to that, or some universities have reacted to that, and they said, well, since you are not able to physically come here, we won't offer this particular scholarship this year. But at the same time, there has definitely been an increase in digital or online programs, both in terms of degrees. I mean, more and more universities are realizing that, hey, we need to offer online degrees. And also, yeah, obviously in terms of things like conferences and summer schools. And I mean, most of those things have been moved online, which is also nice because it has made those things more accessible to people. I mean, so where previously you would have maybe 15 spots and there was a limited budget for travel expenses, the organizers will now have maybe 50 spots, and you don't need to qualify for travel support in order to participate. So on the one hand, yes, it's not the same amazing experience of actually going there, but then at the same time, more people can have a different experience when it comes to those things. And yeah, but at the same time, I mean, I don't have the numbers. Obviously, that's something that scholarship organizations would have more insight into. But just looking at how the economic situation and the educational situation has developed, I do think that scholarships are becoming more competitive simply because there are more people in need of support. I mean, if we're just looking at South Africa, so many people have been economically affected by COVID and therefore need more funding to be able to study. So yes, I think that is something that we are seeing globally. What we obviously can hope is that there will also be an increasing emphasis on then offering that kind of support. And also hopefully that this increase in online programs will also make it possible to actually offer more scholarships that don't require the same massive amount of funding, because people won't necessarily have to travel and tuition fees will be lower. So it's possible that, you know, the one thing may balance out the other a little bit, where the cost of studying somewhere online is lower than doing it in person, which might lead to more scholarships being offered. But at this point, yeah, we don't know. We'll have to wait and see.
Thank you for that. Marsha, you want to say something?
Yeah, so my question relates to what you were saying about how there's an increase in well, it's very competitive to get a scholarship. And also something that you were saying earlier, where you're saying that they're not just looking for somebody that's sort of, you know, sits in their room and studies all day and gets 90% for everything, if that's even possible at UCT. But you know, so my question is that, you know, because I'm sure this relates to, I'm sure I'm not the only person that's dealing with this. And what if you are not the perfect candidate? What if you have, you know, things on your CV that are not perfect? So for instance, maybe at some point along the way, you might have failed a course, or maybe you didn't go to university when you were 18, or whatever it might be. You know, I'm just throwing out those examples. I can't think of, I mean, you know, everyone's got stuff. So do those things necessarily bar you from winning a scholarship? Because I think sometimes what happens is that people think, well, you know what, because this happened to me in my second year back then, I'm just not going to apply. So yeah, I just thought I'd ask that.
Yeah, also very good question. Yeah, and I think that is something that almost every scholarship applicants ask themselves at some point, because I mean, like I said, like nobody's perfect. And yes, there might be those 5 people out there that have the perfect CV and that went straight from point from A to B to C and did all those things in the right order. But for most of us, that's not the case. I mean, let's be honest. So what I always tell people is that when it comes to those scholarship criteria, I mean, when we look at the application criteria, not all application criteria are made equal. There are hard criteria and there are soft criteria. And the trick is to be able to distinguish between the two, to know what's a non-negotiable. So those non-negotiables are usually age criteria, citizenship criteria, previous degrees. Sometimes it's your marks, yes. But those are your hard criteria. So if you don't meet those, then no, you cannot apply for the scholarship. But then there are those other criteria where they say, yeah, look, I mean, professional experience, language, volunteering, leadership skills, and so on and so forth. So if you kind of just meet those hard criteria, then you can use those other fields to make up for, I don't want to call it deficiencies, but you know, to fill those gaps in your CV. So it's kind of almost all about how you sell yourself and how you explain those gaps and how you explain why this happened and why that happened and how you compensate for one thing with another thing. Because yes, maybe it took you 5 years to finish your undergrad, but at the same time you worked and at the same time you volunteered in 3 different organizations. And as long as you can explain that, which you then do in your letter of motivation or with additional documents or even in your CV, then yeah, that does not preclude you from applying. So it's really about hard versus soft criteria and using those additional things to your advantage. And yeah, I mean, really how to sell yourself. I mean, it's always how you present something. It's not so much what it is. And then the other thing is also, I mean, a lot of those programs, they run once a year, right? So whether or not you get in also depends on who you're up against in that particular year. Obviously, that's not something that you know. I mean, we don't know who's applying at the same time. We also don't know who's looking at our application. We don't know if maybe this year they're looking for this particular candidate profile, but that changes from year to year, right? So just because you didn't make it this year, it doesn't mean that you can't reapply again the following year or the following year or the following year. And by then, ideally, you would have also worked on, you know, developing other skills. Your CV will look better because you've taken extra courses or you have professional experience or you've applied successfully for other scholarships. So it's also, I think, just about being persistent and accepting that rejection is it's part of the game, and just being resilient and just trying again. And as I said, next year you might be up against a different group of applicants, or someone might look at your application and says, okay, this is exactly the candidate I want because she did this one particular thing. And those are things out of our control. But we just need to then, as I said, be persistent and try again. Yeah, develop a little bit of a thick skin, I think, also, because rejection is never nice, but it's part of it. Usually there'll be more rejection than acceptance, but it's character building, I guess.
I think this is perhaps why we need to have a second session where we can talk a bit more about how do you sell yourself, because that's also very difficult. So I think let's give an opportunity for 1 or 2 more questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to unmute yourself or pop it in the chat box. It seems that you have covered everything we needed to know at this stage, which is amazing. Thank you so much. I'm going to hand over to Anine to close the session for us.
Yeah, so Lena, again, thank you. That was incredibly thorough and incredibly helpful, much more than I think we even anticipated. So we are incredibly appreciative. Thank you. And thank you to everyone for coming. We're glad